Meryl Streep is a global icon and multi-talented actress with more Academy Awards than some actors' entire collection of awards. But her past and life feature a love story that happened shortly before the big breaks that brought her significant success and shone the limelight on her talent. How did love and loss change Meryl's outcome on life and acting? We have all the details as she speaks out on the loss of her first love, actor John Cazale. Meryl Streep is known for her brilliant performances in many roles, including the evergreen cold boss queen Miranda Priestly in The Devil Wears Prada. But her private life is such a warm and loving contrast to some of the roles in her portfolio. Her marriage to sculptor husband Don Gummer is over 40 years old, almost the same age as her acting career. But the story of her first love has a surprising turn of events that will leave you shocked, in awe, and amazed. Here's a hint. The loss of her first love led her to meet her husband. Talk about a true romance. But before we get too far into the story of Meryl's first love, let's take a step back to the beginning. It all started in 1976. The city was New York, and the play was Shakespeare's Measure for Measure. The young but talented newbie, Meryl, was auditioning opposite the critically acclaimed film star, John Cazale. While you may not instantly recognize John Cazale, you definitely remember Fredo in The Godfather, and the newly settling 26-year-old Meryl Streep was crossing paths with him. While it's imaginable that she was definitely excited to be performing a Shakespeare in the Park production with him, their meeting on this set would lead to something more profound than anyone could have ever imagined. He wasn't like anybody I'd ever met. It was the specificity of him and his sort of humanity and his curiosity about people, his compassion, Meryl once said. Meryl and John experienced a connection to one another that was as intense as it was instant, and the world dissolved around them. On-screen and on-stage romances translate into real-life relationships all the time, but what was happening between Meryl and John was unlike anything before it, and very little can compare to what they shared. Al Pacino, Cazale's friend and co-star on The Godfather, once said about the pair, "They were so happy, I felt they could do anything." They weren't your standard Hollywood couple by any long shot. As a matter of fact, one of the unique things about both of them was their rather unusual appearance that gave off a lot of quirkiness. I didn't have any confidence in my beauty when I was young. I felt like a character actress, and I still do. But the quirky part of their relationship was hushed under all the depth that they carried individually and together, despite their 14-year age difference. Their love was fast, sweet, and passionate, and they enjoyed a few years together, before tragedy struck. In 1977, after much persuasion and strong-arming from Meryl and producer-director Joseph Papp, John Cazale received an official diagnosis for a sickness that had been ailing him and affecting his performance. It was lung cancer, and it had spread to his bones. It was terminal. For anyone, that would have been a life sentence, but Meryl, right from the point of diagnosis, exhibited a unique type of strength. "So where should we go to dinner?" That's what she told John and Joseph Papp after a few minutes of silence had passed when the doctor dropped the news. And that's the kind of strength she showed throughout that ordeal. John Cazale, at the age of 41, was going through the kind of challenge that most actors on the cusp of their success would pray to avoid. But he was able to keep going every day, and a huge motivation was the love, strength, and hope that Meryl showed. Every day as his health deteriorated and hope seemed to diminish, she showed up and showed out. And when you feel loved like that, it's quite easy to believe and hope for better days. But for the pair, none were in sight. Despite his worsening health, John Cazale didn't want to be a burden to his lover, so he kept shooting movies to be able to make money and shoulder some of the financial weight. One movie that marked this period was the 1978 film, The Deer Hunter. Shot while John had barely half a year to live, although no one knew his exact lifespan at the time, The Deer Hunter is a movie that holds more meaning for Meryl Streep. She took on the role of a weak and vulnerable woman, an utter opposite version of herself, essentially a man's view of a woman, just so she could keep an eye on her beau during production. That was how deeply they were connected. According to The Deer Hunter co-star Robert De Niro, "I've hardly ever seen a person so devoted to someone who was falling away like John was. To see her in that act of love for this man was overwhelming." Meryl even went thousands of miles away in Austria to shoot the award-winning 1978 series Holocaust to help with the financial burden of John's illness. But she was more focused on getting home to her sick boyfriend. "I was going crazy. John was sick and I wanted to be with him," Meryl said. When she got back home to the apartment they shared in Manhattan, New York City, she was shocked at how much change had occurred in the 2 months since she had been gone. "I was so close that I didn't notice the deterioration." For the last 5 months of his life, Meryl Streep was John Cazale's lover and nurse. She took care of him through what we can only imagine to be an emotionally exhausting period, and she did it all out of love. As she told her former teacher at Yale, "My beau is terribly ill and sometimes, as now, in the hospital. He has very wonderful care and I try not to stand around wringing my hands, but I am worried all the time and pretending to be cheery all the time, which is more exhausting mentally, physically, emotionally than any work I've ever done." In the last days before the tragedy occurred, the couple sought out professional assistance and John was admitted at the Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center. On the 12th of March, 1978, John Cazale died. The world had lost a bright star, but Meryl had lost her world. According to biographer Michael Schumann, after the doctor pronounced John dead, Meryl wasn't ready to hear it, much less believe it. She pounded on his chest, sobbing, and for a brief, alarming moment, John opened his eyes. "It's all right, Meryl," he said weakly. "It's all right." Then he closed his eyes and died. Meryl met John and fell in love fast and deep, and just as quickly as she had found him, she lost her first love. The grief was eating at her, but she had to embrace through it because something else was happening. She was getting her first streak of wins. "I learned what really is important. I found what is true and what's not pursuing," she said after Cazale's death. A few weeks after the death of her first love, Meryl was trying to move on by moving out of their shared Manhattan apartment. In an interview with People, she admitted that, "The death is still very much with me. It has forced me to confront my own mortality, and once you do that, you look at things differently." And when she was stuck without a place to stay, she asked her brother for help. His sculptor friend, who Meryl had met briefly, Don Gummer, was traveling around Europe and offered Meryl his apartment to stay in while he was away. When he returned from his travels, he asked her to stay, and she did. Meryl Streep was still dealing with the loss of her first love and coming to terms with the new reality of her successful career. But in a rather pleasing turn of events, she was still able to feel and build a connection with Don Gummer. Like all great love stories, Meryl and Don experienced friendship, but it didn't take long for them to fall in love. And about 6 months after they met, Meryl married the sculptor that helped her put the pieces of her heart back together. And they've been together for over 40 years. Meryl Streep loved John Cazale and she fought for him to survive, but it ended in his tragic death. She suffered a great loss, but despite this, she found a great love after as well. "I haven't got over John's death, but I've got to go on living, and Don has showed me how to do that," Meryl said. So, do you think it was love or loss that made the most impact on Meryl Streep's career? Do you think they would have stayed together if he didn't get sick, or was she always destined to marry Don Gummer? Let us know in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this story, feel free to like this video and subscribe to The Chronicle for more inside stories on your favorite celebrities.